There is a mysterious, fleeting kingdom situated perfectly between your busy day and the deep silence of rest. It is a place we visit every night, yet rarely remember clearly. Scientists estimate that the average person spends roughly 7 to 20 minutes in this delicate transition phase before true sleep actually takes hold. If you find comfort in exploring these quiet spaces of the mind, please gently tap the like button or subscribe to ensure you can return here whenever you need to relax. This period is not simply a switch turning off, but rather a complex dimming of the lights, where your brain begins a sophisticated handover of control. As you lie there, the external world does not vanish instantly. Instead, it slowly loses its urgent grip on your attention. During these initial moments, your brain waves begin to slow down from the rapid beta waves of alertness into the rhythmic, calming alpha waves that signal deep relaxation. You might notice that your thoughts become less linear, unspooling like loose thread into abstract shapes, random images, or distant memories. This specific state is often described as the borderland of sleep, a twilight zone where the laws of physics and logic soften, allowing reality to blend seamlessly with the beginnings of dream logic. It is here that many creative thinkers throughout history have claimed to find their best ideas, hovering just on the edge of awareness. Your muscles begin to lose their tension, a gradual process that prevents you from physically acting out the scenes playing in your mind. Simultaneously, your core body temperature begins a very slight drop, a biological signal that tells every cell in your system that it is time to conserve energy. Interestingly, in this gateway phase, your perception of time can become fluid and distorted, making 5 minutes feel like an hour, or an hour feel like mere seconds. The brain also engages in a process called sensory gating, where it actively starts to filter out non-essential background noises, like the hum of a refrigerator or distant traffic, prioritizing silence over information.
You are essentially drifting on a raft away from the shore of consciousness, moving toward the open ocean of slumber. It is quite common here to experience a sudden sensation of falling, often accompanied by a quick muscle twitch, which is simply a harmless miscommunication between nerves as the system powers down. As that brief ripple of muscle activity subsides, you sink deeper into the mattress, beginning the fascinating process of sensory shutdown. It is not a sudden blackout, but rather a graceful, staggered retreat, much like lights being extinguished one by one in a large house at the end of the evening. Vision is almost always the first sense to leave the party. Obviously, you close your eyes to block out the external world, but the process goes deeper than the mechanical lowering of the lids. Even if your eyes were propped open, your brain would eventually stop processing visual data effectively. The visual cortex simply decides it has seen enough for one day. This withdrawal is physically encouraged by the distinct heaviness you feel in your eyelids, a sensation that is often poeticized, but is actually grounded in simple biology. That weight isn't imaginary. It is a physiological imperative caused by the gradual fatigue of the levator palpebrae superioris, the tiny muscle responsible for holding your eyes open. As adenosine builds up in your system, this muscle weakens, effectively forcing a blackout curtain over your vision to preserve moisture and protect the delicate cornea while you recharge. Once the visual world is obscured, the brain begins a complex process known as sensory gating. Deep in the center of your brain, the thalamus acts as a strict gatekeeper. During the day, it relays every sensation, the texture of your shirt, the hum of the fridge, the light breeze from a fan, straight to the conscious mind. But as drowsiness takes over, the thalamus starts closing the doors. It stops forwarding these messages to the cerebral cortex, which is why you eventually stop noticing the weight of the blanket or the position of your limbs.
You are experiencing perceptual decoupling, a state where your mind is no longer tethered to the immediate physical environment, allowing it to turn inward toward the abstract landscape of dreams. Simultaneously, your relationship with the temperature of the room shifts. To initiate sleep, your core body temperature must drop by a few degrees. Your body facilitates this through vasodilation, expanding the blood vessels in your hands and feet to release heat. This is why sticking one foot out from under the covers can feel so wonderfully regulating. However, as your internal thermostat dials down, Your skin's sensitivity to the ambient air changes, making the warmth of the bedding feel increasingly necessary and comforting, creating a cocoon of thermal stability that signals safety to the primitive parts of the brain. Interestingly, the senses of smell and taste are also quick to go offline. It is a curious fact that the brain is remarkably unresponsive to odors during sleep. We do not typically wake up because we smell coffee, but rather because we hear the grinder. This brings us to the final sentinel, hearing. The auditory system is the last sense to fade as you drift off and the first to reactivate upon waking. Even as you slide into the deeper stages of sleep, your ears remain open, acting as a constant surveillance system. Your brain continues to process sounds, categorizing them as safe or dangerous, which is why a loud crash will jolt you awake instantly, while the rhythmic, steady sound of rain or white noise is categorized as safe background texture, eventually lulling the last active sensory outpost into a state of rest. With the auditory world softened into a safe hum, the internal landscape begins its own profound transformation, shifting gears in a way that is invisible to the observer, but deeply felt by the sleeper. This is the descent into the landscape of brainwaves, a journey down the ladder of frequency that marks the true biological gateway to rest. When you are fully awake, alert, and processing the day's events, your brain is vibrating with beta waves.
These are rapid, choppy, and inconsistent electrical pulses, firing anywhere from 13 to 30 times per second. It is a state of high tension, a chaotic marketplace of information processing, where every neuron seems to be shouting to be heard. But the moment you lay your head down and close your eyes, that chaos instantly begins to organize itself. Simply dropping your eyelids cuts off a massive stream of visual data, and in response to this loss of input, the brain naturally slides into alpha rhythms. This is one of the most consistent neurological facts of the human experience. The alpha wave is the bridge between doing and being. These waves are slower, smoother, and higher in amplitude, rolling through the brain at about 8 to 12 cycles per second. It is a state of wakeful rest, similar to a car engine idling in neutral, humming, warm and ready, but no longer moving forward. You are technically still awake in this alpha state, often capable of hearing the house settle or a car drive by, but you have become untethered from the urgency of the day. As you drift deeper, usually within just a few minutes of that initial relaxation, the alpha waves begin to fragment and dissolve, replaced by the even slower, more mysterious theta waves. This is the distinct signature of stage 1 sleep, the true borderland where reality begins to blur. Theta waves oscillate lazily at just 4 to 7 cycles per second, and their arrival coincides with a profound disconnection from the external world. It is here, in the theta state, that your thoughts lose their linear structure, becoming abstract and highly visual, often resulting in those fleeting, nonsensical mini-dreams that vanish instantly if you are suddenly stirred. Accompanying this electrical slowing is a physical phenomenon that is unique to this specific phase of drowsing. Behind your closed eyelids, your eyes begin to move on their own. These are not the rapid, darting movements of deep dreaming that come later in the night, but rather slow rolling eye movements, often abbreviated in sleep science as SEM.
Your eyes gently drift back and forth, like a pendulum slowly losing its momentum, or a boat swaying on a very gentle current. If you were to watch a partner falling asleep, this smooth, rhythmic rolling of the eyes under the lids is the most reliable physical sign that they have crossed the threshold from resting alpha into drowsing theta. The entire process is strikingly similar to the changing conditions of the sea. Wakefulness is a choppy, wind-blown harbor with waves hitting from all directions, unpredictable and sharp. As you relax, the wind dies down, and the water turns into the long, rhythmic, predictable swells of the open ocean, the alpha state. Finally, as theta arrives, the swells flatten out even further, becoming the slow, glassy surface of a tide quietly coming in, carrying the conscious mind away from the shore and into the deep waters of the night. In these deep waters, as the shore of wakefulness disappears from view, we encounter a mysterious boundary line known as hypnagogia. The word itself carries a kind of ancient poetry rooted in the classical Greek language, where it fuses hypnos, meaning sleep,
with agogos meaning leading or guiding. Therefore, quite literally, hypnagogia is the state of being led into sleep. It is not the destination of rest, but the journey taken to reach it, a transitional passage that has captivated human curiosity for millennia. Long before the invention of modern neuroscience or electroencephalograms, philosophers and mystics recognized this unique territory. They viewed it as a twilight zone, a softening of reality where the rigid logic of the day began to dissolve, yet the total immersion of the dream world had not yet taken over. It was seen as a borderland where the soul might loosen its grip on the physical body, allowing for a freedom of thought that was impossible during the alert hours of the day. It is fascinating to note the distinction between simple drowsiness and this active hypnagogic state, for they are not entirely the same phenomenon.
We often conflate the two, assuming that being tired is the same as entering the borderland. But drowsiness is primarily a physiological signal. The heaviness of the eyelids, the slowing of reaction times, and the overwhelming desire to lie down. Hypnagogia, however, is the mental cinema that begins to play once those heavy eyelids finally close. While drowsiness feels like a fading of energy, the hypnagogic state can be surprisingly vibrant, characterized by sensory experiences that simply do not exist in standard fatigue. For this reason, sleep researchers and psychologists have come to classify this transition not merely as a bridge, but as a third, distinct state of consciousness. It is a paradox of awareness, a neurological space where one is neither fully awake nor fully asleep. In this delicate suspension, the brain is capable of generating vivid, dreamlike imagery, yet the individual often retains enough conscious awareness to observe these hallucinations as they happen. You become a spectator in your own mind, watching the curtain rise on the night's performance while still holding a loose tether to the waking world. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this state is its universality. While it can feel like a deeply personal, private secret, studies suggest that nearly 100% of humans experience hypnagogia. It is a shared heritage of the human mind, happening to almost everyone every single night, even if the memory of those fleeting visions evaporates the moment true sleep pulls us under. But before the curtain falls completely, there is an opening act that plays out on the back of your eyelids. When we close our eyes to sleep, we intuitively expect to see perfect darkness, a void of pitch black that signifies the absence of light. However, human vision is rarely capable of capturing true blackness. Instead, most of us stare into a peculiar dark gray background that researchers call Eigengrau. This term, roughly translating from German as intrinsic gray or own gray, describes the shade of darkness seen by the eye in perfect obscurity.
It is actually brighter than a black object viewed in broad daylight, acting as the visual baseline of your nervous system, a canvas that is never completely blank. Against this charcoal canvas, the brain begins to paint. You may notice tiny flickering sparks or drifting clouds of color that swell and fade like breathing light. These are known as phosphenes. They are not caused by light entering the eye, but rather by the spontaneous firing of cells within your retina and visual cortex. Your visual system is never truly off. Even in the dark, the neurons whisper to one another, creating a visual static that looks remarkably like the snow on an old, detuned television set. Sometimes these lights appear as vague blobs of blue or violet, often referred to as Prussian blue, drifting sluggishly across your field of vision. I'm curious, when you close your eyes at night and the room goes quiet, what does your personal darkness look like? Do you see a flat, calm gray, or is your field of vision filled with swirling colors and moving shapes? Feel free to share your nightly view in the comments, as it is fascinating to see how this private experience varies from person to person. For many, this static does not stay random for long. As drowsiness deepens, the random noise of phosphenes often organizes itself into complex geometric patterns. You might see checkerboards, expanding tunnels, cobwebs, lattices, or spirals that rotate slowly in the gloom. This isn't accidental. These geometric hallucinations are thought to reveal the physical structure of the visual cortex itself. Because of the way our visual neurons are arranged in columns and stripes, when they fire randomly, the patterns they create map onto our vision as fractals and spirals. It is a rare moment where we can effectively see the architecture of our own biology projected in front of us. As the mind drifts deeper toward the edge of sleep, the brain, which is an engine designed to find meaning, tries to interpret this visual noise. It is uncomfortable with randomness.
Just as we see shapes in clouds or faces in the bark of a tree, the drowsy brain attempts to organize the phosphenes into recognizable objects. A cluster of blue static might briefly morph into a flower, or a shifting grid might become the brick wall of a house. This is the crucial transition from mere visual noise to hypnagogic imagery, where static pictures begin to move. The scenes become dynamic, often turning into a sensation of moving forward through a tunnel or floating over a landscape, pulling the consciousness away from the waking world and deeper into the abstract logic of the dream. As this logic takes hold, the simple geometric patterns undergo a profound transformation, evolving from mere shapes into recognizable, yet often impossible, complexities. This is the stage where the mind begins to conjure the phenomenon known as the hypnagogic hallucination. It is not a hallucination in the clinical sense, but rather a vivid sensory experience that occurs while you maintain a tether to reality. One of the most common manifestations during this phase involves faces. You might see a succession of visages floating in the darkness behind your eyelids, morphing rapidly from one to another. What makes this experience particularly fascinating to sleep researchers is the anonymity of these visitors. You are rarely seeing the faces of friends or family members. Instead, the brain generates entirely new people, complete with distinct features, expressions, and eccentricities. These are not memories being replayed, but original creations constructed in real time, showcasing the brain's boundless capacity for visual synthesis even before true sleep has begun. Sometimes the imagery is less about people and more about the residue of your waking hours, a phenomenon famously dubbed the Tetris effect. This term originated from players of the block stacking game who reported seeing falling geometric shapes as they drifted off to sleep, but the effect extends to almost any repetitive visual task. If you spent the day gardening, you might see endless weeds being pulled from the earth. If you were coding, lines of text might scroll inevitably downward.
It is a visual echo, a sign that your neural networks are processing and consolidating the repetitive inputs of the day. Unlike the random faces, these images are tethered to your recent past, serving as a bridge between the day's labor and the night's rest. Yet there is a distinct difference between these hypnagogic snippets and the full-blown dreams of REM sleep. In this transitional gateway, the visuals lack a narrative. There is no plot, no emotional stakes, and no story arc. You are simply a passive observer, watching a series of disconnected slides or short looping video clips. You might see a golden landscape that you have never visited, rendered in colors far more vivid and luminous than anything possible in the waking world. The grass is greener, the sky a deeper indigo, possessing a kind of hyper-reality that feels almost electric. This intensity of color is a hallmark of the hypnagogic state, suggesting that the visual cortex is firing without the inhibitory checks of the waking conscious mind. As these landscapes unfold, you may find yourself gliding over them. A common sensation is that of flying low over a body of water or moving through a dense, fantastical forest. These environments are often incredibly detailed, down to the texture of a leaf or the ripple of a wave, details that your waking imagination would struggle to construct with such speed and clarity. It feels less like imagining and more like remembering a place you have never been. However, this state is fragile. The moment you become too interested, the moment your conscious mind tries to direct the scene or analyze the architecture of a dream palace, the image evaporates, dissolving back into static or darkness. It requires a delicate balance of attention. You must remain detached, witnessing the show without trying to be the director. Alongside these visual wonders, the auditory centers of the brain may also begin to misfire in gentle, intriguing ways.
You might hear a snippet of a conversation, a distinct sentence spoken in a familiar voice that makes no logical sense, or perhaps the sound of your own name being called. This is the brain traversing the borderlands of language, uncoupling words from their meanings. These are the precursors to the immersive stories of the night, representing the loosening of the ego, the final moments where you are still present enough to witness the dissolving of your own awareness. As this awareness dissolves, the auditory landscape does not simply fade into silence. Instead, it often transforms into a curious playground of phantom sounds. Even in a perfectly quiet room, the transition into sleep is rarely silent for the brain, which begins to generate its own acoustic data in the absence of external input. One of the most ubiquitous experiences in this phase is the sudden, distinct sensation of hearing one's own name being called. This is not a matter of the ears picking up a sound, but rather the brain's pattern recognition software firing a false positive. Your name is the most significant linguistic tag in your memory, the sound you are most conditioned to respond to. And as the conscious mind loosens its grip, the vigilance centers of the brain, specifically the reticular activating system, may send out this phantom signal as a final instinctive check for engagement before the system goes offline. Alongside these singular callouts, the mind often engages in what neuroscientists might describe as the cocktail party effect in reverse. During the day, your brain is a master at selective hearing, suppressing the background noise of a crowded room to focus on a single conversation. As you drift toward sleep, however, this inhibitory mechanism relaxes. The filters that usually hold back the tide of random associations and memories begin to dissolve, leading to the sensation of hearing snippets of indistinct conversation.
It often sounds like a television playing in a distant room, or a radio left on at low volume. You can hear the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of sentences. Yet if you try to focus on the words to decipher their meaning, the voices tend to evaporate. It is a hum of human connection without the burden of content, a gentle chatter generated entirely by the internal architecture of the auditory cortex. For some, this creative unleashing manifests as music. Without any musical training, people in the hypnagogic state often hear fully orchestrated symphonies, complex jazz arrangements, or original pop melodies with a clarity that rivals high-fidelity recordings. This phenomenon suggests that the brain possesses a profound, innate capacity for composition that is usually stifled by the rigid structures of waking thought. When the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain, clocks out for the night, the imaginative centers are free to improvise, weaving neural static into intricate harmonies. There is a soothing quality to these auditory hallucinations, a sense that the mind is singing itself to sleep. But the experience can occasionally be punctuated by more startling phenomena. You might be familiar with the sensation of a loud bang, a crash of cymbals, or a sharp snap that seems to originate from inside the center of the head. Known as exploding head syndrome, this jarring event is physically harmless, representing a brief, synchronized firing of auditory neurons, a neural hiccup where the auditory system shuts down too abruptly, creating a burst of noise rather than a fade-out. It serves as a stark reminder that the quiet we perceive is an active construction of the brain, and as the maintenance crews of the mind begin their night shift, the machinery of perception can occasionally creak and groan before settling into the deep, rhythmic hum of true slumber. But sometimes, just as that rhythmic hum begins to take hold, the body rebels against the surrender with a sudden startling jolt. It often sounds like a television playing in a distant room, or a radio left on at low volume. You can hear the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of sentences, yet if you try to focus on the words to decipher their meaning, the voices tend to evaporate. It is a hum of human connection without the burden of content, a gentle chatter generated entirely by the internal architecture of the auditory cortex. For some, this creative unleashing manifests as music. Without any musical training, people in the hypnagogic state often hear fully orchestrated symphonies, complex jazz arrangements, or original pop melodies with a clarity that rivals high-fidelity recordings. This phenomenon suggests that the brain possesses a profound, innate capacity for composition that is usually stifled by the rigid structures of waking thought. When the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain, clocks out for the night, the imaginative centers are free to improvise, weaving neural static into intricate harmonies. There is a soothing quality to these auditory hallucinations, a sense that the mind is singing itself to sleep. but the experience can occasionally be punctuated by more startling phenomena. You might be familiar with the sensation of a loud bang, a crash of cymbals, or a sharp snap that seems to originate from inside the center of the head. Known as exploding head syndrome, this jarring event is physically harmless, representing a brief synchronized firing of auditory neurons, a neural hiccup where the auditory system shuts down too abruptly, creating a burst of noise rather than a fade-out. It serves as a stark reminder that the quiet we perceive is an active construction of the brain, and as the maintenance crews of the mind begin their night shift, the machinery of perception can occasionally creak and groan before settling into the deep rhythmic hum of true slumber. But sometimes, just as that rhythmic hum begins to take hold, the body rebels against the surrender with a sudden, startling jolt.
In a panic, it sends an emergency electrical signal to the limbs to snap them upright, an instinctual attempt to grab a branch that no longer exists and catch yourself before you hit the ground. It creates a strange paradox where the brain's attempt to save you is the very thing that disturbs your peace. This phenomenon is often more frequent when the body is overtired or when the nervous system has been stimulated by caffeine or stress late in the day. In these instances, the battle between the reticular activating system, which keeps us awake, and the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, which induces sleep, becomes a bit more turbulent. The brain struggles to hand over the control smoothly, resulting in these sudden, spasmodic fires of neural energy. Yet, despite the heart-pounding sensation that follows, the sudden intake of breath, and the momentary confusion about where you are, the hypnic jerk is entirely benign. It is simply the heavy machinery of the nervous system downshifting a little too aggressively. Once the heart rate settles back down and the feeling of falling fades into the comfort of the mattress, the body usually understands its mistake. The muscles are allowed to heavy themselves once more, and the brain, satisfied that you are not actually tumbling from a tree, finally grants permission for the true descent into the quiet, motionless depths of the night. This descent is not a new journey, but a very old path worn smooth by millions of years of travelers before us. When we drift toward that borderland between waking and sleeping, we are essentially time traveling back to the canopy. The prevailing scientific view regarding the sensation of falling, often called the arboreal theory, suggests that the sudden jolt of a hypnic jerk is a residual reflex from our tree-dwelling ancestors. Picture a great ape high above the forest floor, constructing a temporary nest of bent branches and leaves for the night. The transition to sleep in such a precarious position required a specific kind of physical surrender, but one that retained a spark of vigilance. If the muscles relaxed too quickly, or if the sensation of gravity shifted incorrectly, the brain interpreted this as the onset of a fall. The resulting spasm was not merely a twitch, but a desperate, reflexive attempt to clutch at a branch that is no longer there, ensuring the sleeper could catch themselves before plummeting from the safety of the tree. It is fascinating to consider that the comfort of your modern mattress still hosts these primal echoes. In the wild, the onset of sleep is the most vulnerable moment of the 24-hour cycle. It is the time when the senses must act as a dimmer switch, gradually lowering their reception of the outside world, yet never cutting the power entirely until safety is assured. For early humans and our primate cousins, this twilight zone was fraught with unseen risks. A snapping twig or a rustling leaf during these minutes was not merely ambient noise to be ignored, but potential intelligence regarding a predator stalking in the dark. This helps explain why, just as we are about to drift off, a sudden noise can startle us so completely, pulling us back to full wakefulness with a racing heart. It is an ancient security system coming online, checking the perimeter one last time before the system powers down. Anthropologists suggest that this specific vulnerability shaped how human communities learned to sleep together. There is a concept known as the sentinel hypothesis, which proposes that the varying times at which we feel tired, our individual chronotypes, are an evolutionary adaptation for group safety. By having some members of the tribe drift off early, while others, the night owls, remained alert during the onset phase, the group ensured that someone was always effectively guarding the transition. The drowsiness that feels solitary to you now was once a coordinated effort, a staggered changing of the guard that allowed the tribe to navigate the dangerous bridge to unconsciousness without leaving the camp entirely unprotected.
Even the physical shape we assume during these minutes carries the weight of history.
The overwhelming instinct to curl up, drawing the knees toward the chest in the fetal position, is more than just a search for warmth. It is a defensive posture designed to protect the soft, vital organs of the abdomen from attack during the defenselessness of sleep onset. We pull the covers up to our chins not only for thermal regulation, but because deep in our genetic memory, covering the body provides a psychological shield against the exposure of the open savanna. The heavy blanket becomes a proxy for the thick foliage or the warmth of the troop, signaling to the amygdala that the environment is secure enough to finally close the eyes. This ritual of seeking safety is the final requirement before the mind allows the true disconnect to occur, signaling that the watch is over and the body may finally rest. Once the physical vigilance subsides, the mind begins its own peculiar unraveling, a process where the strict, linear logic of the waking world gently dissolves into something far more fluid. You might notice that the problems which seemed so rigid and demanding just moments ago, the schedule for tomorrow, the conversation from yesterday, begin to lose their structural integrity, softening at the edges like watercolor paint touching wet paper. This is the onset of what psychologists call loose associations, a distinct phase where the brain stops prioritizing cause and effect and starts connecting ideas based on feeling, texture, or random proximity. Deep within the cortex, the default mode network, the highly active web of brain regions responsible for your sense of self, your internal narrative, and your orientation in time, begins to fragment. During the day, this network is the diligent librarian of your mind, ensuring that every thought is filed correctly under reality and reason, continuously checking your internal monologue against the physical world. But as drowsiness sets in, the librarian dims the lights and steps away from the desk. Without this oversight, the boundaries between concepts blur and shift. You might find yourself thinking about a grocery list, which seamlessly morphs into a memory of walking on a beach, simply because the brain decided that the texture of bread feels somewhat like sand. It is in these quiet minutes that we experience the phenomenon of the nonsense thought, those fleeting mental sentences that feel profoundly profound in the moment, but would sound utterly ridiculous if spoken aloud. You might catch yourself thinking that you need to answer the color blue, or fold the Tuesday into the drawer. Have you ever been startled awake by one of these illogical thoughts, realizing only in that brief moment of clarity how strange your internal monologue had become? In the hypnagogic state, the critical faculty that usually flags these ideas as impossible is offline. The logic centers, specifically in the frontal lobes, have reduced their activity, meaning there is no one left to object to the absurdity. To the drowsy mind, a nonsensical statement feels perfectly reasonable, even important, creating a brief, private reality where the laws of physics and grammar no longer apply. This scrambling extends to the language centers of the brain as well, where the precise architecture of sentences begins to crumble. Wernicke's area, which processes the meaning of speech, and Broca's area, which governs syntax, begin to desynchronize. The result is a form of internal monologue that strips away the complex grammar we use to navigate the day. We stop thinking in full sentences and start thinking in impressions, images, or single loaded words. It is a regression to a more primitive, symbolic way of processing information, where the feeling of a thought matters more than its linguistic structure. As the linguistic bridge collapses, visual narratives rush in to fill the silence. These are the micro-dreams, tiny, self-contained stories that last only seconds but feel expansive. You might suddenly be turning a doorknob in a house you've never visited, or watching a geometric shape unfold into a flower.
Unlike true REM dreams, which are immersive and plot-driven, these micro-dreams are often static or repetitive, mere flashes of scenery that the brain generates as it begins to disconnect from external sensory input. They serve as a final, kaleidoscopic curtain call for the visual cortex before it shuts down for the night. This transition from thinking in words to thinking in pictures is one of the most reliable biological markers that true sleep is only seconds away. The mind is no longer projecting its will onto the world. It is becoming a passive observer of its own internal theater, watching the logic of the day drift away like a helium balloon released into a vast twilight sky. It is within this drifting twilight that some of history's most brilliant minds found their greatest treasures. While most of us simply let go of the string and allow the balloon of logic to float away into the night, there have been those who sought to hover in that exact weightless space between the ground and the sky, refusing to fully land in the world of dreams, but unwilling to remain anchored in the world of the awake. Thomas Edison, the man who illuminated the modern world, was famously fascinated by this specific corridor of consciousness. He understood that the transition into sleep, that moment scientists call hypnagogia, was a fertile ground where the rigid barriers of conventional thinking dissolved, allowing for a fluidity of thought that the waking mind simply cannot replicate. The problem with this state, however, is its profound fragility. If you go too deep, you fall asleep and forget the revelation. If you stay too alert, the creative hallucinations never arrive. To solve this paradox, Edison developed a rather ingenious, if somewhat startling, mechanical trap for his own dreams. He would settle into a comfortable armchair, perhaps after a long day of labor in his laboratory, and allow his body to relax completely. But in his hand, draped loosely over the arm of the chair, he held two heavy steel balls.
Directly beneath his hand, on the floor, he placed a metal saucer or a tin pan. He would then close his eyes and invite the drowsiness in. As he drifted off, his muscle tone would naturally decrease, that biological marker of sleep onset, where the body uncouples from the will. The moment he crossed the threshold from wakefulness into the very first stage of sleep, his hand would involuntarily relax, his grip would fail, and the steel balls would fall. The resulting crash against the metal plate would startle him awake instantly. In that split second of forced awakening, he would grasp a pen and frantically record the strange, abstract, or solution-oriented images that were floating in his mind before they evaporated like mist. This technique was not unique to the inventor. For Dali, the goal was not necessarily mechanical invention, but visual liberation. He sought to capture the melting, morphing, impossible landscapes that the brain generates when it is no longer bound by the laws of physics. He believed that the images found in this paranoid, critical state were the purest form of creativity, unburdened by moral or aesthetic self-censorship. Both men were essentially surfing the edge of a cognitive wave, trying to ride it for as long as possible without crashing into the oblivion of deep sleep. Brain scientists now call these moments hypnagogic theta moments. When we are fully awake, our brains utilize beta waves, which are efficient for executing tasks and following strict logic, but they can be restrictive, keeping our thoughts on familiar rails. But as we enter the drowsiness of the hypnagogic state, the brain shifts into alpha and then theta waves. In this state, the mind becomes hyper-associative. It connects two distant ideas that a waking mind would never introduce to one another. It implies that the genius of history was not always found in the grinding gears of hard effort, but often in the soft surrender of a nap, proving that the solution to a complex problem might not be found by staring harder at the wall, but by closing your eyes and letting the wall dissolve.
That dissolution of the mental wall is not merely a metaphor for creativity, but a literal description of what is happening inside your biology. As you drift deeper into this transition, the boundaries of your physical environment begin to soften, and the crisp edges of reality blur into a comfortable, hazy impression. It invites a quiet reflection on your own experience with this twilight state. I am curious if you can recognize the specific physical sensation of your body finally accepting rest, that distinct moment when your limbs feel pleasantly heavy and the sounds of the house seem to move far away. If there is a particular feeling or a comforting mental image that tells you that you are safely crossing the threshold into sleep, do share it in the comments, as these personal signals of rest are often universally shared, yet rarely spoken aloud. This fading of the world is orchestrated by a small, dual-lobed structure sitting deep within the very center of your brain, known as the thalamus. For your entire waking day, the thalamus has acted as the grand central station of your consciousness. It is the tireless switchboard operator, receiving every frantic message from your eyes, your ears, and your skin, and relaying them up to the cortex so you can perceive them as reality. It is the reason you feel the texture of your blanket and hear the wind outside the window. But as drowsiness claims you, the thalamus prepares to abandon its post. It begins to perform its most vital nighttime duty, closing the sensory gate. This is one of the most profound shifts in human consciousness, yet it happens so gently you rarely notice it. The bridge between the outside world and your internal experience is effectively raised. The physiological reality is that the signals from your eyes and ears still travel to the brain. Your ears do not stop hearing simply because you are asleep, but the thalamus refuses to pass the message along. It stops forwarding the calls.
The information hits a neurological roadblock, allowing your mind to turn inward, unbothered by the trivial data of the physical room. We can actually see this blockade in action through quick bursts of brain activity called sleep spindles. On an electrical monitor, they look like tightly wound coils of yarn, sudden flurries of rhythmic waves that ripple through the brain's communication networks during the early stages of sleep. Scientists have discovered that these sleep spindles act as a shield. They are the mechanism that creates the busy signal in the thalamus. The more of these spindles your brain produces during this transition, the more protected you are from disruption. They are the guardians of your slumber, actively working to keep the sensory gate locked so that the noise of a passing car or the settling of the building does not drag you back to the surface. This creates a fascinating paradox during the transition to sleep, where the definition of hearing changes. You might technically hear a sound, but because the thalamus has stripped away its context and refused to alert the higher brain, the sound arrives without meaning. It becomes just a vibration, a texture without a name, floating harmlessly through your awareness before fading entirely, leaving you safely cocooned in the quiet of your own mind. But silence alone is not enough to initiate sleep. The brain requires a chemical permission to shut down, a biological signal that enough time has passed since you last rested. This signal begins with a molecule called adenosine. From the moment you woke up this morning, your brain has been burning energy in the form of glucose and adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. As your neurons fired to process thoughts, navigate traffic, or solve problems, they broke down these energy molecules, and the byproduct left behind was adenosine. You can think of it as the chemical ash left over from the fire of your daily activity. It acts almost like an hourglass filling with sand. The longer you have been awake, the more adenosine is floating in your system, searching for receptors to bind with.
When it docks into these specific receptors, it inhibits the neuron's activity, slowing down the electrical buzz of the waking mind and creating an undeniable biological urge to close your eyes. It is the rising tide that eventually becomes impossible to swim against. While adenosine tracks how long you have been awake, a second chemical system tracks where you are in the rotation of the planet. Deep in the center of your brain, the pineal gland waits for the signal of darkness. As the light fades from your environment, specifically the blue spectrum of light from the sky or screens, this gland begins to secrete melatonin. It is a common misconception that melatonin puts you to sleep. In reality, it acts more like a master of ceremonies, signaling to the rest of the body that the event of sleep is about to begin. It does not knock you out, but rather opens the gate, dimming the internal lights and cooling the body's core temperature to prepare for the transition. To actively dampen the firing of your neurons, the brain releases a neurotransmitter called gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA. When GABA is released, it binds to neurons and makes them less responsive to stimulation. It neutralizes the electrical excitement that characterizes wakefulness, quieting the chatter of the anxiety centers and relaxing the muscles. It is GABA that creates that feeling of heavy limbs, where moving your arm to adjust the pillow feels like lifting a weight through water. Simultaneously, the chemistry of alertness must recede. Cortisol, the hormone responsible for stress and vigilance, naturally drops to its lowest point in the late evening. It is a necessary seesaw effect. As melatonin rises, cortisol must fall. If this delicate balance is maintained, the result is a specific, tangible sensation that you likely feel right now. It manifests as a pleasant heaviness in the eyelids and a distinct, warm pressure sitting just behind the eyes, a sign that the chemical tide has risen high enough to wash you gently onto the shores of sleep.
But before you fully drift away into that deep ocean, there is often a strange, fragmented territory known as the microsleep. This is not the hours-long restorative hibernation we seek at night, but rather a fleeting, involuntary lapse in consciousness that can last for merely a fraction of a second up to 30 full seconds. You have almost certainly experienced this, perhaps without even knowing the technical name for it. It is the sudden, startling drop of the chin during a quiet moment, the infamous head bob that jerks you back to attention with a mild jolt of surprise. In that split second, your brain actually clicked off, severing its connection to the sensory world and effectively stealing a moment of slumber right from under your conscious will. The muscles in your neck, which require active brain signals to stay tense and hold your head upright, suddenly lost their instruction manual, causing gravity to take over until the startling sensation of falling woke you up again. What makes this transition even more fascinating is that sleep is not always an all-or-nothing event for the brain. Neuroscientists have discovered a phenomenon called local sleep, where specific groups of neurons can go offline while the rest of the brain remains technically awake. It is as if the lights in one room of a large house are turned off to save energy, while the rest of the building remains fully illuminated. This means you can be looking at a page in a book or nodding along to a conversation, yet the specific parts of your brain responsible for processing that visual or auditory information have briefly clocked out. You are technically awake, but your perception has become riddled with invisible holes. When we fight against this natural tide, perhaps trying to force ourselves to stay awake during a monotonous drive or a late-night study session, these microsleeps become the brain's aggressive way of seizing what it needs.
It creates a surreal blurring of reality, where the external world might momentarily freeze or disappear, replaced by a flash of dream imagery, a landscape that isn't there, or a voice that no one else in the room heard. This is the dream world bleeding into the waking world, a sign that the border control between the two states has been temporarily abandoned. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these brief excursions is our own blindness to them. When someone snaps out of a microsleep, they will often swear with absolute conviction that they were awake the entire time. The brain stitches the gap in time together so seamlessly that we perceive a continuous stream of consciousness, completely unaware that we just lost several seconds of our existence to the void. This phenomenon helps explain why the initial stage of sleep, known scientifically as N1, is so often misunderstood by the dreamer. Unlike the rich, narrative-driven adventures of rapid eye movement sleep later in the night, this early phase does not possess a plot. When you enter deep REM sleep, your brain constructs elaborate stories laden with emotion, characters, and complex scenarios that feel indistinguishable from reality. However, the imagery of the transition phase is far more abstract and fleeting. It is less like watching a movie and more like viewing a slide projector that is malfunctioning. You might see a flash of geometric patterns, a sudden static image of a face, or a landscape that dissolves as quickly as it appears. These visual hallucinations lack the emotional weight of true dreams, which is why they rarely trigger a significant fear response, even if the imagery is strange or nonsensical. Because this state is so fragile, the boundary between the external world and the internal mind remains porous. During deeper stages of sleep, the thalamus, the brain's sensory gatekeeper, blocks incoming signals from the ears and skin, effectively severing your connection to the bedroom. But in this lighter drift, the gate is still slightly ajar. A creaking floorboard or a distant car alarm can easily pull you back to full wakefulness.
It creates a surreal blurring of reality, where the external world might momentarily freeze or disappear, replaced by a flash of dream imagery, a landscape that isn't there, or a voice that no one else in the room heard. This is the dream world bleeding into the waking world, a sign that the border control between the two states has been temporarily abandoned. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these brief excursions is our own blindness to them. When someone snaps out of a microsleep, they will often swear with absolute conviction that they were awake the entire time. The brain stitches the gap in time together so seamlessly that we perceive a continuous stream of consciousness, completely unaware that we just lost several seconds of our existence to the void. This phenomenon helps explain why the initial stage of sleep, known scientifically as N1, is so often misunderstood by the dreamer. Unlike the rich, narrative-driven adventures of rapid eye movement sleep later in the night, this early phase does not possess a plot. When you enter deep REM sleep, your brain constructs elaborate stories laden with emotion, characters, and complex scenarios that feel indistinguishable from reality.
However, the imagery of the transition phase is far more abstract and fleeting. It is less like watching a movie and more like viewing a slide projector that is malfunctioning. You might see a flash of geometric patterns, a sudden static image of a face, or a landscape that dissolves as quickly as it appears. These visual hallucinations lack the emotional weight of true dreams, which is why they rarely trigger a significant fear response, even if the imagery is strange or nonsensical. Because this state is so fragile, the boundary between the external world and the internal mind remains porous. During deeper stages of sleep, the thalamus, the brain's sensory gatekeeper, blocks incoming signals from the ears and skin, effectively severing your connection to the bedroom. But in this lighter drift, the gate is still slightly ajar. A creaking floorboard or a distant car alarm can easily pull you back to full wakefulness.
It creates a surreal blurring of reality, where the external world might momentarily freeze or disappear, replaced by a flash of dream imagery, a landscape that isn't there, or a voice that no one else in the room heard. This is the dream world bleeding into the waking world, a sign that the border control between the two states has been temporarily abandoned. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these brief excursions is our own blindness to them. When someone snaps out of a microsleep, they will often swear with absolute conviction that they were awake the entire time. The brain stitches the gap in time together so seamlessly that we perceive a continuous stream of consciousness, completely unaware that we just lost several seconds of our existence to the void. This phenomenon helps explain why the initial stage of sleep, known scientifically as N1, is so often misunderstood by the dreamer. Unlike the rich, narrative-driven adventures of rapid eye movement sleep later in the night, this early phase does not possess a plot. When you enter deep REM sleep, your brain constructs elaborate stories laden with emotion, characters, and complex scenarios that feel indistinguishable from reality. However, the imagery of the transition phase is far more abstract and fleeting. It is less like watching a movie and more like viewing a slide projector that is malfunctioning. You might see a flash of geometric patterns, a sudden static image of a face, or a landscape that dissolves as quickly as it appears. These visual hallucinations lack the emotional weight of true dreams, which is why they rarely trigger a significant fear response, even if the imagery is strange or nonsensical. Because this state is so fragile, the boundary between the external world and the internal mind remains porous. During deeper stages of sleep, the thalamus, the brain's sensory gatekeeper, blocks incoming signals from the ears and skin, effectively severing your connection to the bedroom. But in this lighter drift, the gate is still slightly ajar. A creaking floorboard or a distant car alarm can easily pull you back to full wakefulness.
This fragility is a biological safeguard, a remnant of a time when sleeping in the wild required a hair-trigger sensitivity to potential danger. It explains why, if you are gently nudged while in this state, you wake up instantly clear-headed, often denying that you are asleep at all. Your brain simply hasn't traveled far enough away from wakefulness to feel the grogginess associated with waking from deep slumber. The perception of time in this state is equally deceptive. In deep, slow wave sleep, time seems to vanish completely. 8 hours can feel like a mere blinking of the eye. However, in the drift of N1, time can stretch or compress in unpredictable ways. You might nod off for 2 minutes during a quiet moment and feel as though an hour has passed. Or conversely, you might rest in this twilight state for 40 minutes and believe you have only just closed your eyes. This distortion occurs because the brain's internal metronome, the mechanism that tracks the linear progression of moments, begins to decouple from your conscious awareness. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this transition is a phenomenon known as sleep onset amnesia. As you drift downward, the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain responsible for forming new long-term memories, is one of the first regions to power down. It effectively stops recording before you actually fall asleep. This creates a retroactive blind spot. You literally cannot remember the moment you fell asleep because the machinery required to capture that memory had already been switched off minutes beforehand. It is a necessary neurological erasure, ensuring that we do not remain trapped in an infinite loop of analyzing our own descent into unconsciousness, allowing the mind to finally let go without clinging to the recording of the event. Yet even as we prepare to let go, the biological machinery does not always power down in perfect silence.
For some sleepers, the very moment of transition is marked by a sudden, startling phenomenon known by the rather dramatic name of exploding head syndrome.
While the title might conjure images of something catastrophic or painful, it is crucial to first understand that this experience is a benign sensory curiosity, entirely painless and devoid of physical danger. It is not a symptom of injury or a structural problem, but rather a momentary misunderstanding between the brain's different operating systems as they attempt to coordinate the night's rest. Those who experience this phenomenon describe drifting peacefully through the twilight of consciousness, comfortably detached from the waking world, only to be jolted back by an incredibly loud noise that seems to originate from the center of their own skull. It is frequently reported as the sound of a heavy door slamming, a clash of massive cymbals, a thunderclap, or even a firework going off within the mind. The sound is vivid, deafening, and indistinguishable from reality, often causing the heart to race and the eyes to snap open in alarm, only for the sleeper to realize the room remains perfectly quiet and undisturbed. To understand why this auditory hallucination occurs, we must look at the brainstem, specifically the reticular formation, which acts as a master switchboard for our senses. As you fall asleep, this system is responsible for inhibiting the inputs from your body, turning off the sense of touch, dimming the visual cortex, and dampening your hearing. Usually, this shutdown happens in a smooth, cascading wave, like a dimmer switch slowly lowering the lights in a large house. However, exploding head syndrome occurs when there is a slight delay or a technical glitch in the deactivation of the auditory neurons. Instead of fading out gradually, the neurons in the auditory cortex fire all at once in a massive, synchronized burst. It is effectively a neural short circuit, similar to a microphone giving a loud pop of feedback just as the sound system powers off. This sudden discharge creates the perception of a loud explosion where none exists. In many ways, it is the auditory equivalent of the hypnic jerk, that common sensation of falling that causes your leg to twitch, but expressed through sound rather than movement.
In this confused state, it can no longer distinguish between your own body and the space immediately surrounding it. To resolve this discrepancy, the brain takes your own body map, the neural blueprint of your physical existence, and projects it outward. The presence you feel, or the shadow you see in the periphery, is actually a neurological echo of yourself. You are, in a very literal sense, sensing your own existence, but the brain has misplaced the location, perceiving your own consciousness as an external entity standing nearby. Understanding this mechanism transforms a potentially unsettled moment into a marvel of biology. It serves as a reminder of how complex the construction of reality truly is. The shadow person is not an intruder, but a reflection, a harmless byproduct of the mind untethering itself from the physical world to begin its nightly journey. It is merely the brain's way of asking where you end and the dream begins, before finally allowing the two to merge into the safety of deep sleep. Sometimes, however, the intricate synchronization between the conscious mind and the physical vessel experiences a momentary delay, a slight lag in the system, that reveals one of the human body's most fascinating safety features. This phenomenon is what we call sleep paralysis, though a more comforting name might be the biological safety belt. While it can feel unsettling to wake up and find yourself unable to move, this state is actually a sign that your brain is functioning exactly as it should to protect you. Deep within the architecture of the brainstem, specifically during the phases of sleep where vivid dreaming occurs, the body induces a state known as REM atonia. This is a nearly complete relaxation of the major skeletal muscles, a neurological lock that prevents you from physically acting out the scenes playing in your mind. Without this paralysis, the boundaries between the dream world and the physical world would blur in dangerous ways.
Since the diaphragm is a muscle that remains under your control to keep you breathing during sleep, taking a sudden, deep breath or changing the rhythm of your exhalations can send a signal to the brainstem that you are awake, prompting it to release the chemical lock. Rather than fighting the sensation, which can create anxiety, simply observing it as a marvel of biology allows the transition to complete itself naturally. Within moments, the connection is restored, the heaviness lifts, and the body rejoins the mind, ready to begin the day or drift back into the comfort of rest. As we drift deeper into this relaxation, the rigid geometry of the physical world begins to soften, leading to one of the most intriguing phenomena of the sleep onset phase, the warping of spatial perception. You may have noticed moments where, with your eyes closed, the sense of your own body size begins to shift, a neurological curiosity often referred to as Alice in Wonderland syndrome. This is not a dream, but a sensory distortion where the brain's parietal lobe, which manages your body map, briefly reduces its processing to prepare for shutdown. During this transition, you might experience macrosia, a sensation where a specific part of your body, often the hands or the head, feels incredibly large, heavy, and expansive, as if your fingers have become giant balloons resting on the mattress. Conversely, the sensation of microsia may occur, where you feel as though your entire physical form has shrunk down to the size of a speck of dust floating in a vast, empty expanse. These distortions are completely harmless and are simply signs that the brain is decoupling from the sensory inputs of the skin and muscles, allowing the internal model of the self to become fluid. This alteration of scale often extends beyond the body and projects out into the room itself. Even though your eyes are closed, your brain maintains a sense of the space around you, but as drowsiness sets in, the perceived walls of your bedroom may suddenly feel as though they have moved miles away.
Since the diaphragm is a muscle that remains under your control to keep you breathing during sleep, taking a sudden deep breath or changing the rhythm of your exhalations can send a signal to the brainstem that you are awake, prompting it to release the chemical lock. Rather than fighting the sensation, which can create anxiety, simply observing it as a marvel of biology allows the transition to complete itself naturally. Within moments, the connection is restored, the heaviness lifts, and the body rejoins the mind, ready to begin the day or drift back into the comfort of rest. As we drift deeper into this relaxation, the rigid geometry of the physical world begins to soften, leading to one of the most intriguing phenomena of the sleep onset phase, the warping of spatial perception. You may have noticed moments where, with your eyes closed, the sense of your own body size begins to shift, a neurological curiosity often referred to as Alice in Wonderland syndrome. This is not a dream, but a sensory distortion where the brain's parietal lobe, which manages your body map, briefly reduces its processing to prepare for shutdown. During this transition, you may experience macrosia, a sensation where a specific part of your body, often the hands or the head, feels incredibly large, heavy, and expansive, as if your fingers have become giant balloons resting on the mattress. Conversely, the sensation of microsia may occur, where you feel as though your entire physical form has shrunk down to the size of a speck of dust, floating in a vast, empty expanse. These distortions are completely harmless and are simply signs that the brain is decoupling from the sensory inputs of the skin and muscles, allowing the internal model of the self to become fluid. This alteration of scale often extends beyond the body and projects out into the room itself. Even though your eyes are closed, your brain maintains a sense of the space around you, but as drowsiness sets in, the perceived walls of your bedroom may suddenly feel as though they have moved miles away.
If you pay too much attention to the process, your brain realizes you are awake and halts the transition, leaving you simply lying in bed awake. Conversely, if you relax your mind too much, you lose the thread of awareness and drift into normal, non-lucid sleep. The goal is to become a passive observer, watching the transition happen to you rather than trying to force it. As you lie there, completely still, you begin to witness the raw construction of the dream world. It usually starts with visual static, blooms of color, geometric patterns, or flashes of light dancing behind your closed eyelids. This is hypnagogic imagery, a personal light show generated by the firing of optic neurons as they disconnect from external input. At first, these shapes are abstract, mere pulses of blue or violet. But as you go deeper, they begin to coalesce into recognizable forms, perhaps a face, a landscape, or an object, appearing briefly before dissolving back into the darkness. Speaking of the transition into sleep,
I am curious about your own nightly routine. Do you have a specific mental technique you use to wind down, such as counting backwards or visualizing a peaceful place? Or do you prefer to just let your mind wander until you drift off? I would love to read about your personal methods for finding relaxation in the comments. As you continue to observe these hypnagogic hallucinations without engaging with them, a physical phenomenon often occurs that can be surprising to the uninitiated. This is known as the vibrational state. It is frequently reported as a buzzing sensation, feeling somewhat like a gentle electric current running through the limbs, or a deep resonance within the inner ear. While it can be intense, this vibration is actually a sign of success. It indicates that sleep paralysis is setting in, the body's natural safety mechanism that prevents us from acting out our dreams physically. In this moment, you are technically asleep and awake simultaneously. Your physical body is paralyzed and recharging, but your mental awareness is vibrant.
This is the precise moment to attempt a separation from the physical form. Dreamers often use visualization techniques here, such as imagining a rope hanging above them and pulling themselves up hand over hand, or simply willing themselves to float upwards or roll sideways out of bed. Because the body is now asleep, the brain interprets these signals not as muscle movement, but as movement within the dream space. If successful, you will feel yourself separate from your physical body, stepping out of bed into a perfect replica of your room, fully lucid and ready to explore, having crossed the bridge from the waking world without ever losing consciousness. However, this bridge between worlds is not always crossed with such deliberate control, and throughout history, the accidental stumbling into this state has birthed some of humanity's most enduring myths. When the mind wakes up, but the body remains under the heavy blanket of REM atonia, the result is sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that ancient cultures could only explain through the lens of the supernatural. Before modern neuroscience could identify the role of neurotransmitters like glycine and GABA in immobilizing our muscles, people believed they were being visited by entities from the shadow world. The storytellers describe the old hag, a spectral crone who creeps into the room and sits heavily upon the sleeper's chest. This specific detail, the crushing weight, is biologically accurate, caused by the sensation of manual breathing being suppressed while the automatic respiratory functions continue. But the interpretation changes the experience from a medical curiosity into a terrifying visitation. Travel halfway across the globe to Japan, and you find the exact same biological event described as kanashibari. The term translates loosely to being bound with metal or fastened by invisible iron strips. It perfectly captures the rigidity of the experience, the feeling that the limbs are locked in place by an external force. In Japanese tradition, this was often attributed to vengeful spirits or the ghosts of ancestors, yet the physical symptoms are identical to those reported by the fishermen in Newfoundland.
This is the precise moment to attempt a separation from the physical form. Dreamers often use visualization techniques here, such as imagining a rope hanging above them and pulling themselves up hand over hand, or simply willing themselves to float upwards or roll sideways out of bed. Because the body is now asleep, the brain interprets these signals not as muscle movement, but as movement within the dream space. If successful, you will feel yourself separate from your physical body, stepping out of bed into a perfect replica of your room, fully lucid and ready to explore, having crossed the bridge from the waking world without ever losing consciousness. However, this bridge between worlds is not always crossed with such deliberate control, and throughout history, the accidental stumbling into this state has birthed some of humanity's most enduring myths. When the mind wakes up, but the body remains under the heavy blanket of REM atonia, the result is sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that ancient cultures could only explain through the lens of the supernatural. Before modern neuroscience could identify the role of neurotransmitters like glycine and GABA in immobilizing our muscles, people believed they were being visited by entities from the shadow world. The storytellers describe the old hag, a spectral crone who creeps into the room and sits heavily upon the sleeper's chest. This specific detail, the crushing weight, is biologically accurate, caused by the sensation of manual breathing being suppressed while the automatic respiratory functions continue. But the interpretation changes the experience from a medical curiosity into a terrifying visitation.
Travel halfway across the globe to Japan, and you find the exact same biological event described as kanashibari. The term translates loosely to being bound with metal or fastened by invisible iron strips. It perfectly captures the rigidity of the experience, the feeling that the limbs are locked in place by an external force. In Japanese tradition, this was often attributed to vengeful spirits or the ghosts of ancestors, yet the physical symptoms are identical to those reported by the fishermen in Newfoundland.
This is the precise moment to attempt a separation from the physical form. Dreamers often use visualization techniques here, such as imagining a rope hanging above them and pulling themselves up hand over hand, or simply willing themselves to float upwards or roll sideways out of bed. Because the body is now asleep, the brain interprets these signals not as muscle movement, but as movement within the dream space. If successful, you will feel yourself separate from your physical body, stepping out of bed into a perfect replica of your room, fully lucid and ready to explore, having crossed the bridge from the waking world without ever losing consciousness. However, this bridge between worlds is not always crossed with such deliberate control, and throughout history, the accidental stumbling into this state has birthed some of humanity's most enduring myths. When the mind wakes up, but the body remains under the heavy blanket of REM atonia, the result is sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that ancient cultures could only explain through the lens of the supernatural. Before modern neuroscience could identify the role of neurotransmitters like glycine and GABA in immobilizing our muscles, people believed they were being visited by entities from the shadow world. The storytellers describe the old hag, a spectral crone who creeps into the room and sits heavily upon the sleeper's chest. This specific detail, the crushing weight, is biologically accurate, caused by the sensation of manual breathing being suppressed while the automatic respiratory functions continue, but the interpretation changes the experience from a medical curiosity into a terrifying visitation. Travel halfway across the globe to Japan, and you find the exact same biological event described as kanashibari. The term translates loosely to being bound with metal or fastened by invisible iron strips. It perfectly captures the rigidity of the experience, the feeling that the limbs are locked in place by an external force. In Japanese tradition, this was often attributed to vengeful spirits or the ghosts of ancestors, yet the physical symptoms are identical to those reported by the fishermen in Newfoundland.
However, as drowsiness sets in, the chemical signals required to etch new memories begin to recede, causing the hippocampus to cap its pin before the rest of the brain actually shuts down. This creates a phenomenon known as sleep-onset amnesia, a harmless and necessary inability to form new long-term memories during the transition into slumber. It is the reason you might read the same paragraph 3 times before bed without absorbing it, or why you instantly forget the last thought you had before drifting off. The recording tape stops rolling a few minutes before the show actually ends, leaving you with a permanent blank spot where the transition occurred. Scientists believe this early cutoff serves a vital protective function, preventing the brain from encoding the hallucinations or fragmented thoughts of the hypnagogic state as reality, ensuring that when you wake, you do not confuse the onset of a dream with a memory of the physical world. Yet, while the hippocampus stops recording new input, it does not go idle. Instead, it shifts its entire operation from reception to organization, beginning the critical nightly task of memory consolidation. As the external world fades, the brain begins to review the day's events, prioritizing which moments are significant enough to be moved from temporary storage into the sturdy, long-term archives of the neocortex. This is the filing process that turns a fleeting afternoon conversation into a recollection you might hold for decades, effectively clearing the desk for tomorrow's new information. This nocturnal review is so precise that the brain actually performs a high-speed replay of the day's learned physical patterns. If you spent the afternoon practicing a new song on the piano, the neurons in your motor cortex will fire in the exact same sequence during this transition phase and into deeper sleep, only they will do so at a much faster rate than when you were awake. It is a form of silent, motionless practice, where the brain reinforces the neural pathways of a new skill without you lifting a finger.
Older adults often report that the boundary between being awake and being asleep feels porous. This is partly because the biological pressure to sleep, known as the homeostatic drive, accumulates more slowly and dissipates more easily than it did in youth.
Additionally, the neurons responsible for generating the deep, slow waves of restorative sleep begin to degrade or lose their synchronization. Consequently, the elderly may find themselves hovering in that twilight zone for longer periods, drifting in and out of the initial stage of slumber rather than sinking continuously into the deep. The sensation of falling asleep becomes less like a heavy curtain dropping and more like a gentle, sometimes inconsistent, fading of the light. However, in our modern era, this natural fading is frequently interrupted by a specific artificial glow that changes the very architecture of our drowsiness. We have effectively learned to carry the midday sun in our pockets, bringing it into the sanctuary of the bedroom. This is not merely a poetic metaphor, but a biological reality concerning the specific spectrum of light emitted by our devices. Most smartphones, tablets, and LED monitors emit a high concentration of light at a wavelength of roughly 450 nanometers. To the sensitive photoreceptors in our eyes, particularly the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, this specific blue frequency is the signature of high noon. When this light hits the retina during the transition period, it sends an urgent signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in the brain, effectively shouting that the day has just begun. Consequently, the production of melatonin, that essential chemical messenger we rely on to usher us through the gates of sleep, is swiftly suppressed. The brain is tricked into a state of artificial alertness, pushing the onset of sleep further into the night, even if the body is physically exhausted. It creates a discordant state where the limbs feel heavy, yet the mind remains electrically charged. This phenomenon is often compounded by a behavior psychologists have termed revenge bedtime procrastination.
Older adults often report that the boundary between being awake and being asleep feels porous. This is partly because the biological pressure to sleep, known as the homeostatic drive, accumulates more slowly and dissipates more easily than it did in youth. Additionally, the neurons responsible for generating the deep, slow waves of restorative sleep begin to degrade or lose their synchronization. Consequently, the elderly may find themselves hovering in that twilight zone for longer periods, drifting in and out of the initial stage of slumber rather than sinking continuously into the deep. The sensation of falling asleep becomes less like a heavy curtain dropping and more like a gentle, sometimes inconsistent, fading of the light. However, in our modern era, this natural fading is frequently interrupted by a specific artificial glow that changes the very architecture of our drowsiness. We have effectively learned to carry the midday sun in our pockets, bringing it into the sanctuary of the bedroom. This is not merely a poetic metaphor, but a biological reality concerning the specific spectrum of light emitted by our devices. Most smartphones, tablets, and LED monitors emit a high concentration of light at a wavelength of roughly 450 nanometers. To the sensitive photoreceptors in our eyes, particularly the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, this specific blue frequency is the signature of high noon. When this light hits the retina during the transition period, it sends an urgent signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in the brain, effectively shouting that the day has just begun. Consequently, the production of melatonin, that essential chemical messenger we rely on to usher us through the gates of sleep, is swiftly suppressed. The brain is tricked into a state of artificial alertness, pushing the onset of sleep further into the night, even if the body is physically exhausted. It creates a discordant state where the limbs feel heavy, yet the mind remains electrically charged. This phenomenon is often compounded by a behavior psychologists have termed revenge bedtime procrastination.
This occurs when we feel we have lacked control over our daytime hours due to work or other obligations, so we subconsciously refuse to go to sleep early in order to regain a sense of freedom late at night. We scroll through feeds and watch videos, not because we are not tired, but because we are desperate to reclaim personal time, inadvertently stretching the transition from wakefulness to sleep into a protracted battle of will. Beyond the biological impact of the light itself, the nature of the content we consume acts as a potent cognitive stimulant. Engaging with a screen is often a bidirectional, interactive activity. We await likes, we respond to messages, and we refresh news feeds. This generates a loop of cognitive arousal and mild dopamine release that is antithetical to the passive relaxation required for slumber.
A notification badge represents a tiny burst of anxiety or excitement, a demand for attention that pulls the mind back from the edge of the unconscious. Contrast this with the experience of reading a physical book under soft light. A paper page reflects ambient light rather than emitting high-intensity photons directly into the eyes, a crucial distinction for the visual cortex. Furthermore, the narrative of a book is usually linear and finite, lacking the infinite scroll that keeps the brain in a state of perpetual anticipation. When reading on paper, the eyes grow heavy naturally as the mind follows a single calming thread, whereas the screen demands constant, rapid-fire processing of fragmented information, keeping the gateway to sleep firmly closed long after we intended to walk through it. Conversely, there are ancient and modern practices designed specifically to linger in this doorway, treating the transition not as a hurdle to jump over, but as a vast, quiet landscape to be explored with intention. One of the most profound examples of this is Yoga Nidra, often translated as yogic sleep, which is a systematic method of inducing complete physical, mental, and emotional relaxation while maintaining a sliver of awareness.
For them, the heavy, sinking feeling of drowsiness is not an ending, but a portal to a different kind of reality, where the dreamer can act with full volition. It highlights a fascinating distinction in the science of sleep, the difference between falling asleep, which implies a loss of control, and entering sleep, which suggests a deliberate passage. While the average person experiences the onset of sleep as a fading of the light, the meditator experiences it as a dimming of the room, so that a different, inner light can be seen, turning the inevitable pull of drowsiness into a tool for profound inner discovery, rather than just a biological necessity. As that inner light stabilizes, the awareness of the physical body often undergoes a curious transformation, leading to sensations that have baffled mystics and scientists alike for centuries. You may have experienced those fleeting moments where the heaviness of your limbs seems to evaporate, replaced by a distinct feeling of weightlessness or levitation. This phenomenon is deeply rooted in the vestibular system of the inner ear, which relies on constant feedback from gravity and movement to tell you where you are in space. When you lie perfectly motionless as you drift towards sleep, the signals from the inner ear fade into silence, and the brain, momentarily untethered from its usual coordinates, interprets this lack of data as a sensation of floating, creating a private, gravity-free environment before the mind fully shuts down. It is perhaps this precise physiological detachment that explains why the threshold of sleep shares so many reported similarities with near-death experiences. For generations, the sensation of leaving the body or moving towards a light has been viewed through a spiritual lens. Yet sleep science suggests these are natural, repeatable functions of a brain in transition. The famous tunnel of light, often described in near-death accounts, is remarkably similar to the visual phenomena that occurred during the onset of sleep. As the visual cortex begins to power down, it does not turn off all at once. Instead, the blood flow and neural activity tend to recede from the periphery first. For them, the heavy, sinking feeling of drowsiness is not an ending, but a portal to a different kind of reality, where the dreamer can act with full volition. It highlights a fascinating distinction in the science of sleep, the difference between falling asleep, which implies a loss of control, and entering sleep, which suggests a deliberate passage. While the average person experiences the onset of sleep as a fading of the light, the meditator experiences it as a dimming of the room, so that a different, inner light can be seen, turning the inevitable pull of drowsiness into a tool for profound inner discovery rather than just a biological necessity. As that inner light stabilizes, the awareness of the physical body often undergoes a curious transformation, leading to sensations that have baffled mystics and scientists alike for centuries. You may have experienced those fleeting moments where the heaviness of your limbs seems to evaporate, replaced by a distinct feeling of weightlessness or levitation. This phenomenon is deeply rooted in the vestibular system of the inner ear, which relies on constant feedback from gravity and movement to tell you where you are in space. When you lie perfectly motionless as you drift towards sleep, the signals from the inner ear fade into silence, and the brain, momentarily untethered from its usual coordinates, interprets this lack of data as a sensation of floating,
creating a private, gravity-free environment before the mind fully shuts down. It is perhaps this precise physiological detachment that explains why the threshold of sleep shares so many reported similarities with near-death experiences. For generations, the sensation of leaving the body or moving toward a light has been viewed through a spiritual lens. Yet sleep science suggests these are natural, repeatable functions of a brain in transition. The famous tunnel of light, often described in near-death accounts, is remarkably similar to the visual phenomena that occur during the onset of sleep. As the visual cortex begins to power down, it does not turn off all at once. Instead, the blood flow and neural activity tend to recede from the periphery first.
For them, the heavy, sinking feeling of drowsiness is not an ending, but a portal to a different kind of reality where the dreamer can act with full volition. It highlights a fascinating distinction in the science of sleep: the difference between falling asleep, which implies a loss of control, and entering sleep, which suggests a deliberate passage. While the average person experiences the onset of sleep as a fading of the light, the meditator experiences it as a dimming of the room so that a different inner light can be seen, turning the inevitable pull of drowsiness into a tool for profound inner discovery rather than just a biological necessity. As that inner light stabilizes, the awareness of the physical body often undergoes a curious transformation, leading to sensations that have baffled mystics and scientists alike for centuries. You may have experienced those fleeting moments where the heaviness of your limbs seems to evaporate, replaced by a distinct feeling of weightlessness or levitation. This phenomenon is deeply rooted in the vestibular system of the inner ear, which relies on constant feedback from gravity and movement to tell you where you are in space. When you lie perfectly motionless as you drift toward sleep, the signals from the inner ear fade into silence, and the brain, momentarily untethered from its usual coordinates, interprets this lack of data as a sensation of floating, creating a private, gravity-free environment before the mind fully shuts down. It is perhaps this precise physiological detachment that explains why the threshold of sleep shares so many reported similarities with near-death experiences. For generations, the sensation of leaving the body or moving toward a light has been viewed through a spiritual lens, yet sleep science suggests these are natural, repeatable functions of a brain in transition. The famous tunnel of light, often described in near-death accounts, is remarkably similar to the visual phenomena that occur during the onset of sleep. As the visual cortex begins to power down, it does not turn off all at once. Instead, the blood flow and neural activity tend to recede from the periphery first.
In the animal kingdom, this is most clearly seen in dolphins and certain birds, who engage in unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, allowing one half of the brain to sleep while the other remains awake to watch for predators or surface for air. While humans generally do not sleep with one eye open, our brains do exhibit a phenomenon known as local sleep. When we are exhausted, specific clusters of neurons can go offline and enter a sleep-like state even while we are technically awake and talking. Conversely, during the transition into true sleep, parts of the brain responsible for listening might remain active long after the centers for movement have shut down. It creates a scientific paradox that makes mapping this territory incredibly difficult. To know for sure what a person is experiencing in the twilight zone, a scientist must wake them up to ask, and in doing so, they destroy the very state they wished to observe. It is a phenomenon that insists on remaining private, a secret handshake between your conscious self and the dream world that vanishes the moment it is scrutinized, leaving us to rely on the soft, fragmented memories of those few seconds before the world fades away completely. In this way, the simple act of lying still in a darkened room mimics the profound isolation of a sensory deprivation tank, effectively cutting the cables that tether you to physical reality. You are reducing the constant stream of data that your senses usually feed to the brain, and in that absence of external input, something remarkable happens. Because the human brain is a pattern-seeking machine, a relentless engine designed to interpret signals that does not tolerate a vacuum well. When the lights go out and the room falls silent, the brain simply turns up the volume on its internal sensors, searching desperately for something, anything to process. This biological craving for stimulation leads to a phenomenon with a rather poetic, if slightly ominous name, known as the prisoner's cinema.
While the term originated to describe the vivid hallucinations reported by individuals confined to dark dungeons or subjected to solitary confinement,
It is not exclusive to the incarcerated, but rather a fundamental quirk of our neurology that visits us nightly. When you close your eyes and stare into the back of your eyelids, you are rarely met with a flat, uniform blackness, but rather a shifting, dynamic canvas of visual noise. Neuroscientists refer to these luminous phenomena as phosphenes, the perception of light without light actually entering the eye. It is the visual system generating its own entertainment, firing random impulses that the cortex interprets as swirling clouds of indigo, sparks of violet, or undulating geometric lattices that seem to breathe with a life of their own. It creates a private screening room where the mind projects its own raw static before the true feature presentation of dreaming begins, proving that even in the absence of the world, the mind refuses to remain blank. This internal light show is often the first true sign that you have crossed the threshold into the hypnagogic state, a visual handshake between the waking eye and the dreaming mind. It is fascinating to consider that this experience is perhaps the most solitary event of a human life. For while we can share a meal, watch a movie together, or even describe a dream after the fact, the prisoner's cinema is a phenomenon that can never be recorded or shared in real time. It happens entirely within the closed circuit of your own optic nerves, a kaleidoscope of gray and neon that exists for you and you alone. Have you ever noticed specific colors or shapes when you close your eyes tight in a pitch-black room? I imagine many of us see that characteristic shifting blue, or perhaps a checkered pattern, yet we rarely speak of it, assuming it is just a trick of the light, rather than the brain's creative resistance to boredom.
This generated imagery serves as a bridge, a way for the consciousness to remain occupied while the body powers down. Distraction therapy provided by your own neurons. In experiments involving the Ganzfeld effect, where participants stare into a uniform field of color while listening to white noise, they report similar hallucinations within minutes, seeing horses jumping over clouds or hearing voices in the static, demonstrating that the mind is an artist that requires a canvas, and if you give it a blank one, it will paint over it immediately. As you lie there watching these phantom lights dance across your vision, you are observing your own biology at work, the spontaneous firing of cells that creates a galaxy behind your eyes. It is a gentle reminder that you carry an entire universe of perception within you, one that does not require the sun or a lamp to illuminate. This generated imagery serves as a bridge, a way for the consciousness to remain occupied while the body powers down. Distraction therapy provided by your own neurons. In experiments involving the Ganzfeld effect, where participants stare into a uniform field of color while listening to white noise, they report similar hallucinations within minutes, seeing horses jumping over clouds or hearing voices in the static, demonstrating that the mind is an artist that requires a canvas, and if you give it a blank one, it will paint over it immediately. As you lie there watching these phantom lights dance across your vision, you are observing your own biology at work, the spontaneous firing of cells that creates a galaxy behind your eyes. It is a gentle reminder that you carry an entire universe of perception within you, one that does not require the sun or a lamp to illuminate it, only the quiet permission of the night to reveal itself. This private light show is not merely a quirk of your own anatomy, but a shared heritage of our species. Across every continent and through every era of history, humans have experienced this same gradual dimming of the world. It is a comforting thought to realize that the drift into sleep is perhaps the most universal action we perform. Whether an emperor resting in a palace of silk or a weary traveler sleeping beneath the stars, the physiological sequence of disengaging from reality remains remarkably consistent. We are united in this vulnerability, all of us entrusting ourselves to the automatic pilot of our biology. This trust extends far beyond humanity. If you have ever watched a dog sleeping on a rug, witnessing their paws twitch or their eyelids flutter, you have seen the external signs of this same internal journey. While we cannot ask them if they see the same geometric patterns or phosphenes that we do, the electrical activity in their brains during this transition mirrors our own astonishingly well.
We know that many mammals share the specific brainwave shifts. Transitioning from the alert beta waves to the relaxed alpha waves and finally into the slow theta waves that signal the true onset of slumber. Even the dolphin, which must remain conscious to breathe, partakes in a modified version of this drift, allowing one hemisphere of its brain to slide into sleep while the other remains awake to watch the water, a phenomenon known as unihemispheric slow wave sleep. It raises the interesting question of why this process is a fade rather than a switch. Why do we drift instead of simply clicking off like a lamp? The answer lies in the sheer complexity of the machine that is the brain. A sudden shutdown of such a sophisticated network would be chaotic. Instead, the transition acts as a biological boot-down sequence. It allows neurons to settle and synchronize, preventing a shock to the system. During these precious minutes of drowsiness, your brain is actually beginning a crucial cleaning process, preparing to open up the glymphatic system to wash away the metabolic waste products that accumulated while you were thinking, solving, and worrying throughout the day. There are ancient safety features built into this descent as well. You may have experienced that sudden, startling sensation of falling just as you are about to lose consciousness, causing your body to jerk awake. This is known as a hypnic jerk. One leading theory suggests this is an evolutionary echo from when our ancestors slept in trees. As the muscles relaxed too quickly, the brain interpreted the signal as falling out of the branches and sent a panic signal to the muscles to grab hold. It is a primitive alarm system that still lingers in our modern, comfortable beds, a ghostly reminder of a time when the drift was more dangerous. Simultaneously, another mechanism works in the opposite direction to ensure your safety. As the mind begins to conjure the vivid imagery of dreams, the brainstem sends a signal to paralyze the major muscle groups, a state called atonia.
This prevents you from physically acting out the scenes playing in your mind, keeping you safe and still while your consciousness roams free. It is a delicate balance, keeping the heart beating and the lungs breathing, while disconnecting the legs from running and the arms from reaching. When you consider the chemical cascade required to orchestrate this, the release of adenosine, the suppression of cortisol, the rise of melatonin, the simple act of falling asleep reveals itself to be a physiological masterpiece. It is not an absence of activity, but a shift in operations, a changing of the guard that protects your sanity and restores your vitality. This changing of the guard marks the final threshold of your journey tonight, a seamless handover from the alert captain of your consciousness to the quiet, automatic wisdom of the body's night watch. You have traveled through the invisible architecture of drowsiness, moving from the high-frequency chatter of the day through the relaxing alpha waves, and now into the slow, rolling tides of theta. It is a voyage that happens every single night, yet remains a profound physiological miracle, a complex symphony of neurons and hormones playing a lullaby that is perfectly synchronized to your internal rhythm. As you hover here, in these vast, velvet minutes between worlds, notice how the need for effort has completely dissolved. The biological checklist is complete. The temperature has dropped, the cortisol has faded, and the adenosine has done its heavy work. There is nothing left for you to manage, nothing left to analyze, and nowhere else you need to be. You are simply a passenger now, carried by the momentum of your own biology toward the restorative depths. The hypnagogic imagery, those fleeting, abstract splashes of color and fragmented sounds, are beginning to dim, receding like a shoreline as your ship pushes out into the open, calm ocean of the deep. There is an immense safety in this surrender. To fall asleep is the ultimate act of trust, a nightly proof that you are secure enough to let down your defenses and allow the unconscious mind to begin its healing work.
As the darkness becomes comforting rather than empty, consider this your invitation to return to this space whenever you need a guide through the quiet hours. If you have found solace in this exploration of the drift, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, ensuring that we can journey together again through more relaxing facts and soothing stories designed to help you find this state of ease. But for now, the learning is finished and the thinking is over. the tether to the waking world slips from your hand, not with a jerk, but with a gentle release, like a leaf finally letting go of its branch to settle on the soft earth below. The gateway has been crossed, and the heavy golden anchor of sleep has touched the ocean floor, securing you in a harbor of perfect, uninterrupted peace.